What's up?
We've already had an interesting conversation, and it wasn't even on the air yet.
Well, we were
That'd
on
be
the air, but we didn't share it.
no, yeah. Well, maybe someday we will. It's good stuff.
It's a really relevant topic. We can talk about it real quick, briefly, to let folks know what it was without. Do you think we can do that without like heading down that rabbit trail?
I can give a very nutshell that we were talking about people being sensitive to where people are. That they've been hurt by the church. There's a lot of us.
Yeah.
Well, I don't know that I would put myself in that category, but there's a lot of people who have, and multiple people
Yeah.
to you who that's the case.
Even if you talk about being adjacent to people who have been abused, right? If it's like if one of your kids gets hurt, right? It hurts you,
Yeah.
right? And so when you're adjacent to somebody who has dealt with that, I mean, you're naturally protective.
Certainly.
So anyway, but I think that's a topic for another day.
Right. Well, and the only thing else I would want to say to that is when you're dealing with with a topic with someone who they're emotional about it, because a lot of these topics, there's an emotional wound. You got to address the emotion, because facts just sound condescending.
Yeah. Amen.
So, all right.
Otherwise, it's Tuesday.
It is Tuesday. It's gray Oregon, so that's normal.
Yay.
Golf?
However, we do have a countdown, right?
Yes.
Like 13 days? No, more than that.
Not
12,
the following.
13 days, I think.
Yeah. Till we get daylight savings time. That'll be great. And then spring is we've survived the winter, which is nice. It's actually been a really mild winter here. It's beautiful. I work on just appreciating the bleak, blurry darkness of the winter. I know.
I did better last year than this year. Last year, my enthusiasm for disc golf got me kind of through. But this year, I'm still playing, but I'm also like, oh man, everything's so wet and muddy and cold and dark.
I think part of my issue is, well, one, I have that seasonal light disorder thing. Also, and this is just a relatively new. Well, no, it's not that new. I think I tend towards sadness in my life, and when it's dark and dreary, that's kind of a gloomy, emotional time. So I think that's part of what I don't like about winter, where spring is so happy with the sun and flowers and all that sort of stuff. I think that's a piece of it.
Yeah. Well, I tend toward the melancholy in, my everyday. I mean, I think I've got humor and everything, but I tend to lean into the melancholy, and it's a little easier to kind of unwind that.
Yeah.
Versus something that seems to reinforce it, which is dark and bleak and cold and
yeah.
Anyway,
Do you like sad movies?
do I like them? I do. We watched one last night. I like to cry at movies.
I can't stand them.
I don't like bleak movies. I don't like movies that leave you going, there was no hope. That leave you with no hope, So sad movies that are bleak, no. But sad movies like this one was a celebration of grieving this man's parents, and who died when he was 12. And it was beautiful and touching, and it imagined what it would be like him as a 45-year-old man if he met his parents again, and they were the same age as when he died, and they were reconnecting. Wow. It was so good. Yeah.
Wow. Yeah, I have no interest in that movie.
Yeah.
No, it does sound really good, and yeah, it would be very fascinating. I mean, both of us lost our parents in our 50s, and yeah, wouldn't that be interesting to see them in 10, 15 years, to hear what they thought about things and ask them questions, and yeah, that would be interesting.
I've often wondered what it would be like to, remembering vaguely what my dad was like in his early 50s, what it would be like to sit and have a cup of coffee with my dad at that age and to talk
Oh,
about the things he was struggling with and the things that brought him joy and his hopes for his remaining years, you know?
yeah. Wow. Because we don't know our parents when they were young. None of
No.
us do. I mean, even if they had their kids when they were, I don't know, 20, still the earliest you would really have any real thinking about them is when they were in their 30s. So,
Yeah.
but in my case, my parents didn't have me until they were like 35. So I have no real sense of who they are until they were at the minimum in their 40s. Dad was very different than he was in his 20s.
Oh, I'm sure.
Yeah. Well, you knew my dad. You know he had a motorcycle that they took trips to Mexico?
I think you mentioned that.
Like, who is this guy? Anyways, we should probably get on the topic.
Yeah. The topic is faith.
It is faith. I walked through Hebrews chapter 1, verses 1, 2, and 3. I suggested 3 aspects of this description. It's not really a definition. It's more of a description of what a person who has faith is like. And the first one is that there's an intellectual piece to it, an agreement that certain things are true. But it's more than just an agreement that it's true. There's also a wanting it to be true, a longing for it. There's a trust. There's a joy in it. There's a hope for Jesus's return. The second aspect had to do with that people who have faith, there's evidence, there's symptoms of that. Faith alone saves us in the same way that a virus it makes you sick. But if you have that, there's symptoms of it. You're not sick because you have a cough. No, you have a cough because you have a cold. And so in the same way, we're saved by our faith. But then, those symptoms are going to be, well, looking at all of Hebrews chapter 11. So it's going to be sacrifice and obedience and priorities and living to please God. And there's just kind of in a much more radical way than maybe we're accustomed in modern times, the way that their faith set them apart from society. And then the third part is just that faith is something that has happened to you. And he likens it to the creation of the universe. It happens because of the Word of God and its effect on your life and your heart. So there we go.
One of the first things that I thought of was going back to religion class in high school. And we talked about the nature of faith in class. And it really resonated with me because as somebody who kind of tends to live in my own brain, that wants to parse things out, that wants to understand how things work at a fundamental, foundational level, right?
Okay.
That faith said, you're not going to get this, right? That you're not going to have concrete answers, to all the questions that you have, and that therefore there's a chasm that your faith creates a bridge across, right? That
True.
And
for every question.
Yeah. And that's not to say that our faith is founded on the existence of a chasm. Like, there are answers for a lot of the questions that we have. Most of them, probably. But I remember specifically, because I was a member of an LDS scout troop, which drove my dad nuts, by the way, as a good Catholic boy, to be going with my friend the Mormons to their scout stuff. It really just bugged the heck out of him. And not without reason, because there was always a little proselytizing that was going on. And in some cases, it was because these people loved me so much, and I know this to be true, that they couldn't imagine me not having eternity with them because I didn't believe correctly. Yeah. I remember a friend of mine in high school crying because she's like, but you're not going to make it, Joe. I'm so worried about you. It's like, it's going to be okay. But it's very sweet. But then there was the people who weren't invested in my life, but who were like maybe driving me to the event, who were like trying to convince me through rationale. I don't understand how you can believe in a faith that doesn't understand answers to certain questions, right? And it was like, I think that I have to believe in the absence of all the answers because of this ultimate truth of Christ dying, Christ being, born again, resurrected. My soul is now clean, kind of stuff. Mm-hmm. And so and this is a long-winded way of saying that my personal faith is founded upon the fact that I can't have the answers. And so when those niggling of doubts pop in, it's like, it's going to be okay. Yeah. And I go back to the foundational elements of who Christ is. So that's a lot of kind of how I think about that. Now, that doesn't necessarily reinforce anything that you just shared, but I wanted to share that kind of personal.
Well, I think going off of that, I think a big thing that I don't know if Christians struggle with it, but certainly non-Christians get hooked up on is to try and say that Christianity needs to be proven with the same way that you prove a scientific theory. Yeah. It's not the same thing. Like you can't prove scientifically that George Washington was the first president. That's not how you do that. You look at the records, you look at the effects he had. I mean, you look at eyewitnesses. I mean, that's the kind of evidence. Or another one is you can't scientifically prove that someone committed a particular crime. You look at the evidence. Now, science can make an impact in that discussion, but it doesn't lead you to the full conclusion. It just can help you with that answer, but it's not the same kind of a thing. And so really looking at it differently, I think is really helpful. And it's kind of what's the word I'm looking for? It's a false way of trying to prove or disprove Christianity is to base it entirely on the scientific method. I don't think that's helpful or productive to do so.
Yeah, I think as you've been explaining it, I'm kind of going, well, let me see, how do I feel about that? And I guess the thing is, like, let's take that whole crime thing, whether somebody committed a crime, right? If there's a camera there, that provides evidence, but that's not science, right?
No, it's not science.
And you could maybe find a fingerprint, which would be science, right? The element of.
But just because they have a fingerprint, that doesn't prove it.
Right. It just becomes a piece of data that is used to further understand or to put things together. But
it infers things.
Right. The things that you can prove with science are generally minute. Like they are a piece of data. Science will provide that. And actually, that's the whole point of the scientific method, is to break things apart into minute pieces of information that can build upon each other to prove maybe a theory.
Right. They provide data points, but they don't draw the lines.
Yeah.
To paint the picture. They never do. So that helps. And there's I mean, if an occasion, I mean, I don't generally struggle with my faith. That's not my piece. I know it is for a lot. And you have my empathy for people who really do struggle with whether or not it's all true. But one of the things that does help me is, I do regularly look at things, people's, whether it's archaeological or it's scientific arguments that say, well, what's the latest in DNA testing? What is it saying these days? Oh, okay. It says, there's such a thing as irreducible complexity, that, you can't reduce the cell so far. If you reduce it down too far, then it doesn't function. Okay, well, I mean, I could get all that, but those things are data points. They don't actually prove that there's a creator. It just simply suggests that there's a creator.
Yeah.
So,
well, here's something that's interesting though, is because I think this can bite us on either side, right? Because I would agree with what you're saying that science isn't proving things, but we also have a tendency to lean in to try to use science to prove our own,
yeah,
right? And it's like, well, like, oh, but here's something, look at that, trying to like get you back at the science people or whatever. I'm putting that in quotes. People
sure.
can't see it. And I think we need to resist the urge to like engage that way because there's you can't prove it any more than they can.
Right, which gets to that second piece. There's a will. Your will, your inner deep desires plays an enormous impact in all of this whole discussion. Whether you're pro or you're against God, the aspect of what do you want to be true matters enormously. The ability of the human being to self-deceive and to form presuppositions that color the evidence in your mind is massive. And so what do you want matters.
Yeah. Yeah. The way we read things, interpret things, what we
right.
project meaning on things.
And there's a lot of things, and I'll throw out a couple of big words here for of post-modernity that's very bad, relativism, blah 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 blah. But one of the great ones of it is the recognition that our perspective does impact how we see things. Modernity didn't look at that, and if you would like me to talk more about that in the comments, I'm happy to do so. But that's a whole deep well. But anyways, our presuppositions matter. And when it gets back, I suppose, to the beginning thing we said at the start with the emotion, whether or not there's a God is an emotional discussion. It's never a not emotional discussion because we all know that it has huge impacts on everything in our lives and how we see things. And so whether or not we've accepted that there's some kind of deity, we know deep down that's a big deal.
Yeah.
Emotion.
There are ramifications, right? We respond strongly to things that we hold as important.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Like if I said the Steelers in '77 were a garbage team, and that that's not true, right? At least that's your perspective.
That's my perspective, and I have data points to prove that that's wrong. But your point. Right. So that's one of the pieces. But then there's also the piece of just the whole looking at how those people in Hebrews 11 lived out their faith. Did you have any thoughts about just kind of reading through the list of just some of the ways that they demonstrated their faith?
You're going to have to refresh me because I'm...
okay. I certainly can. Hey, I have it pulled out. So here we go. Let me look at some of that. So we have Abel brought a better offering. So there's the sacrificing.
Yeah.
There's Enoch lived to please God. You have Noah building the ark in spite of, obviously his, everybody around him thinking he's a nutcase. Abraham literally leaving his home, his country, moving to a place he had no idea where it's going to be. You got Moses, his parents are literally disobeying the government. You've got Moses refused to be known as the son of the Pharaoh's daughter. And so there's that whole, I don't care what people think about me, rejecting the pleasures of sin. Ooh.
Yeah, no, I can jump in.
There you go.
Yeah.
A lot of radical things that these people are doing.
It reminded me in the moment of, this shouldn't be a sensitive topic, but for some people it may be. One of my favorite stand-up skits was Bill Cosby's Noah skit, because it was presented in a way where you're like, well, what rational person would do something like this, right? I mean, like, how are people perceiving what you're doing? Well, for Noah, I mean, at least in that skit, it's like, oh, really, God? I mean, are you sure? There's a negotiation there, which we actually see a lot in the Bible. We think about Jonah trying to negotiate with God, and it didn't work out real well. But it may not seem rational to the outside world when we elect to follow our calling, or to just sit and wait to receive that calling, or to do something that makes us uncomfortable because it's the most appropriate thing to do given our faith. That's something that I think we're called to do that, and evangelizing, right, is something that I've spent a lot of my time, let's say from my 20s forward, trying to understand how to do that in a way that's both effective and not incredibly uncomfortable or salesy. I'm really sensitive to sales pitches and stuff like that, because I've sat in a lot of Amway conversations.
That's your fault.
It is, because I don't say no well.
You're a kind person.
Yeah, kindness kills, right? So, when you see somebody who puts things out there, right, because they know it's what they're called to do, it's because it's what their faith says is appropriate. That's impressive, and may not appear rational to the secular world. And I think ultimately what we see in those stories is that what they're doing proves to be correct, right? That ultimately the world understands the why of that there is, it's proven there. And so the proof is in the pudding kind of aspect to it. And so if we're living according to faith, that will show not just in our Christian community, but to the world in general.
Right. I've been thinking about this analogy of, let's say you're on a beach and suddenly the tide pulls back, way back. And nobody around you understands what's happening. They think, oh, wow, there's all these fish and they're not available. Let's run out and grab all those fish. But you know what's happening, that a tsunami's coming. So instead of running after fish, which seems perfectly reasonable, right, you actually stream and run the other direction. That seems utterly absurd and irrational. But you know something to be true that they don't know or are not convinced that that's the case. I think that's what faith is like. It's like, something that they either don't want to believe, or they haven't learned, or whatever the reason is, they don't see something that you see. And so you're reacting to what you can perceive as occurring, that there's danger that you need to run from. What do you think of that analogy?
Well, let me restate it, just turn it a little bit, or that our faith provides us with a perspective that is different from the world's perspective, and it allows us to see things in a different light.
Yes.
And we should respond to how we see things according to the truth that we know.
Right.
Even if it seems counter to conventional wisdom, or I don't want to use the term ignorant, but maybe a naive or limited perspective, right?
Right.
Going to, like, discovering that you didn't pay for something at the store and going back and letting somebody know so that you can pay for it. I mean, that's integrity, but it's also, some people, it's just like, I don't think you need to do anything about that.
Right, and they're just acting out of what they know and their presuppositions and the way they see things. Their priorities are based on those things, and it makes sense to them. Why would you need to deal with it? On the other hand, those who go back, at least as a Christian, it's like, well, because I know there's a righteous judge. I know that it's going to please Jesus to go do this. Okay, well, therefore, I'm going to go do this. That makes sense. It's all presuppositions. Yeah. But the point of that section was that if you really are convinced that Jesus has died and rose again, and he's coming back to bring a reward, that's going to affect the choices that you're going to make in your life. If it's not, my point is not that you're not saved. It's like, why isn't it?
Yeah.
Why isn't it? Should.
I think, the whole Noah and the Ark thing is very much along the same lines of the ocean fish analogy, which is, why would you build a big boat for a storm that nobody believes is going to come? That just seems ridiculous. It's like, no, I know this. Okay, buddy, you build your boat, but we've got work to do here. We have fields to tend to. We have animals to take care of, our families to take care of. And it seems like you're wasting a lot of time on something that, what?
Why would you do that? It really is a waste of time.
Yeah.
Waste of your time, your energy, your everything. It's like, that makes no sense, Noah. No sense. Well, that's because he was convinced that when God said there's coming a flood, it's going to occur. There you go.
Yeah.
Well, I think that's enough. I don't think we have really time to get to the last one, other than, the Word of God helps. I think the only piece I would like to remind people of that is if your perspective and matters, that soaking your brain in Scripture helps you think along the way God does. Because if how much time do you spend in that versus watching television? Boy, that's
convicting.
Yeah. Or just anything that's dramatically affecting the way you view. Maybe it's just the news, not just TV as a whole, but the news, because the news has its own perspective. No matter which side, no matter which program you use, they have a perspective.
Yeah.
Postmodernity. Anyways, that's all I really wanted to say on that piece.
All right. So what's in the topic coming up this week in the service is?
I think we're going to be talking about is the security of the believer. I think that's really helpful, especially in response to this week. What does it mean to live securely? That God really does have you and is going to get you home. So that's what we're going to be talking through.
All right. Excellent. Looking forward to it. And then I have a week off. So.
Yes, you do.
Yeah.
You do. So. All right. You guys take care. Thanks for joining us.
All right. Take care, folks.